Just want to talk to you today about a rare opportunity. So my background, spent the last 13, 14, 15 years in the digital media space. Particularly a couple of reasons why I love that space. It's just really fast moving and rapidly changing. And there's a few factors for why that's so, but I thought it'd be interesting to maybe touch on that at the beginning. But I just specifically want to talk to you about a bit of a turnaround story and a rare opportunity in the technology space to really genuinely start with a bit of a green slate, especially for an organisation that's been around longer than Australia. My background, so media, prior to this built Stan, so for the Netflix people, who's a Stan customer here? Show of hands. Oh, thank you very much. Who has Netflix? Ah, geez, tough crowd. So, Stan was great, exciting build, but, no legacy. So, blank slate, get to cut a path, use the best of what you want to use. But when you're dealing with a company that is already in existence and one as large as Fairfax, you don't have that luxury, or do you? So, but before I do that, I want to take you in a bit of a detour. This is my last talk as a Fairfax media employee because, and that's why I wanted to wear the t-shirt, we've been purchased by Nine, and makes me a little bit sad, but I just want to talk through some of the amazing work that we've done and where we've gotten to. So this is John Fairfax, 1836. This guy leaves England because basically he got sued. He went after a guy in England as a publisher and basically showed that he was ripping off his customers, got taken to court, actually won the court case, but basically it sent him bankrupt. So he got on a boat and he came to Australia, 1836. And 4 years later, with basically £10 in his pocket, he bought the Sydney Herald. And the Sydney Herald became the Sydney Morning Herald. So if you're wondering what Australia looks like in 1836, this is it. So who's a Kiwi here? So you were part of New South Wales. So maybe it would have been in your best interest to stay as part of Australia. I'm not sure. Slightly contentious. Wouldn't be an Australian presentation without a cheap shot at the Kiwis. So obviously very, very different. And really we were a penal colony. And Australia's been part of Fairfax has been part of the fabric of Australia's life since that point in time. When we were a penal colony, the Sydney Morning Herald was advocating for more free settlers, and they called it the shame. We wanted to stop basically convict labour because we saw ourselves as a free set of colonies. And in the 1870s, we're advocating for federation in 1900s, and basically even right through to the current day, past 4 years, people like Eddie Obeda are in jail because of great reporting from people like Kate McClymont. And we've had 2 royal commissions that have been started by Fairfax, institutional child abuse and the Banking Royal Commission. I mean, there's a profound legacy there, and people talk about the Fourth Estate, and the Fourth Estate refers to the media and the press landscape. And there's a lot of people that work at Fairfax and are very committed to the work they do because of its function in society. It's not so much for the money, it's not so much for the great tech. They're there because they're committed to a cause. And really, that's why I'm there as well, in part, because I actually believe in the purpose. Because without this, I don't know that you can have a healthy functioning democracy unless you have a free press. And hopefully that resonates for most people. But media has some very fundamental catastrophic issues in play. There are no barriers to entry to media. So literally, if I want to go start a bank, take on the Commonwealth Bank, I have a number of hurdles. I've got to get regulatory approval. I've got to get some serious capital funding. There's a bunch of legal requirements around registration of companies and due diligence. But if I want to start a newspaper, wordpress.org, DFP account, start writing some content, build an audience, all of a sudden the revenue's coming in and you're a media publisher. Congratulations. So this is what has happened to newspaper revenue in the past, well, this shows 2000 and 2010. So that is disruption. Industries talk about disruption. Disruption happened to media first because, again, no barriers to entry. So if we contrast that with growth in Google revenue, you can see where the revenue went to. And that's okay. Like, we're not, like, you know, no harm, no foul. The business has to change. We need to adapt. We need to readjust. The business model needs to change, but it needs to change on a timescale and a footing that is profoundly different than what most industries have time to cope with. So, again, when you're a small company, you can get a bit crazy. You can move quickly. You know, if you want to change direction, get everyone in a room. You know, talk about the drivers, talk about the reason for the change, and basically get up and underway, and you can walk out the room and you can pivot pretty quickly. When you've got an organisation with 5,000, 6,000 people, that's a little bit more tricky. So how do you go about doing a radical change when you are not changing fast enough to keep up? And for anyone that's worked in a large company, and I'd probably class large as north of 500 people, there is a lot of inertia. There's bureaucracy, there's process, and have you spoken to Mike in finance about this? You know, and there's an immune system that attaches to organisations where they don't, you know, there's vested interest. They don't want to necessarily see anything impact them. And the classic example here might be, if I switch back to the streaming space, you know, Foxtel had Presto in market. Now, Presto was its subscription video on demand play, but it was a threat to the actual cable Foxtel business. So, you know, it ended up killing off that business because there were vested interests inside of Foxtel that didn't necessarily want to see that thing grow, even though over the longer haul, which is a classic dichotomy of disruption, it was going to be a potential vehicle to arrest or allow for future growth beyond when the cable business starts to tank. So really what I'm talking about here is how do you disrupt yourself? Innovation, I love this definition. You know, innovation is about doing the same things a little bit better. So Fairfax had sort of innovated itself into a corner. What we really want to do is how do we just radically reshape that and turn things upside down so that those things are obsolete? So the goal here, which I touched on earlier, is we need to not be as competitive as News Limited or The Guardian. Our competition was, you know, a bunch of young people writing great content with a WordPress.org account, which I mentioned. So how does a large company attempt to compete at the same rate of change as our smallest, most nimble competitor? That's the challenge. So it's probably worth touching on what we were dealing with. There was quite a bit of enterprisey thinking. So what I mean, you tend to see this where, you know, big CapEx projects, solving problems through buying vendor solutions that aren't quite fit for purpose or are misaligned to what our needs are. You know, Fairfax had invested heavily in a CMS called Adobe Experience Manager, which is great if you're a marketing department, probably not so good if you're a 600, 700 journos in the building. 150 in the department, no great engineering voice in the broader environment. Business is frustrated from the lack of ability. And, you know, there were quasi-agile practices, like teams were working notionally in sprints, but that was wrapped in a Gantt chart with relative waterfall practices. So, you know, trying to change that overnight is like boiling the ocean, but we don't have the luxury of time. So how do we go about doing this? So this is where I had the good fortune to join Fairfax with a mandate directly from the board, and I appreciate not everyone has this luxury, but along with a new management team, basically we had a board-approved mandate, so skipped all the management structures of Fairfax, that said, you guys have license to go away and reimagine what this publishing business needs to look like. And that's a pretty rare event. So, you know, there are some things in your control, but, you know, given the opportunity to do that, we want to seize that with both hands. So our challenge was to create a sustainable future for our business by taking 187-year-old company and assets, one of the oldest newspapers in the world, older than the New York Times and many of the English papers, and combining that with a radically new and digitally focused operating model, rebuild the news properties along with that, and basically set ourselves up to make money for commercial growth. and equip our editorial team with a world-class publishing platform. So, I mean, just to touch on this, no, I'll save that for the end, actually. This in itself is a rapidly changing space in terms of publishing environments and what that takes. And of course, because we're a cash-strapped media company, got to do that on a relatively modest budget, no great cash cows lying about. So how do you bootstrap that? Thankfully, there is, in my view, a problem with having too much money. There's something that comes into creativity and a different way of thinking when you are constrained financially, and I'm sure a few people in the crowd could relate to that. It certainly brings forth a bit of engineering creativity. So first step was, let's get out of Dodge. So don't stay inside the physical building where people may not necessarily agree with that license that you got to just go and do what you need to do, because you may well be doing things, I can almost guarantee you'll be doing things that they fundamentally disagree with. Clayton Christensen wrote a book, Innovator's Dilemma, which talks to this, that it's very rare to see disruption occur within a business because of the immune system kicking in. So physical distance, we're at Piedmont, but we went and basically booked some physical space out at Surrey Hills, made sure it was right next to some fried chicken places and some good food on a Friday for team building. We needed practical, operational and funding autonomy, so we needed the license to be able to do what we needed to do. Focused on starting with a zero-day engineering team. So I called this our Desert Island 6. So who are the 6 engineers that we want to be, that we want to pull out of the business to be on the desert island with us on day one? So I didn't know the business at large, so I went in there, spoke to a few different engineers and different managers around who they'd propose, and we coalesced a team. We then knew that we didn't want to necessarily fall into old habits, and we needed to inject some relatively new blood into the environment as well. So we went and found off-market some great key talent. So put them through the ringer, hired some fresh thinking in, and then we just set about. We were largely time boxed. We knew we wanted to sort of be in market and get something out there in 12 months. If we went beyond 12 months, then circumstances change too radically in that type of business. So we set ourselves a year, and we scoped against that. So we had some engineering, and this will be this presentation. It will appeal to the geekiness in me in elements, and then there's a people and a change component as well. And I think those two things working in harmony is what delivers a reasonable outcome. So these are some of the engineering principles we wanted to work to. For us, APIs were key, points of differentiation. We'd use SaaS-based services, but we'd never do point-to-point integration. We'd always work through APIs. Media landscape is not deep, but it's very broad. We knew that we could get a lot of ground and a lot of traction just through adopting a fairly mature open source market for our use cases. Bias to release. Previously the environment we were dealing with took months to get a release out, and it was highly fragile. So, how do we start from day one as we're shipping that first feature or that first thin slice of our architecture? How do we get from concept to market and get our build pipeline stood up? Stay headless. So for those that deal with the content space, CMSs are really opinionated. They just presume the world is the web. The problem is these days we're in a bot-based interactions, and we've got content that wants to be distributed far and wide. Everything from RSS and native applications through to machine learning algorithms that we're starting to use. So to do, those aren't, having your content in markup is not the best way to make sure you can service those channels efficiently. So we came up with a headless CMS. So effectively, we use WordPress to author content, and then we push that in a JSON store into a content API with Go APIs in front in a microservice environment. Convention over constraints. How much code is written to stop people doing stupid stuff? So how about we just let people do, because there's that one time in 1,000 where people want to do that stupid thing because it actually solves the problem that they need to get done. So we wanted to rely on conventions over constraints. We wanted to trust in the newsroom that, rather than push them through a fairly strict workflow, go, hey, you can publish a live breaking news story and skip all of sub-editing and everything else and all the other controls if you really need to. We wouldn't necessarily advise it, but it's there if you need it. And what that ends up doing is it places a level of control into the business and a level of flexibility from those systems that is prudent for the type of business we are, without, the side benefit from an engineering perspective is we're writing less test cases, less code, less exceptions to the rule, which means we're moving quicker. And lastly, self-describing. So everyone's familiar with infrastructure as code. Rather than separating out the understanding of the infrastructure from the application, we bundle the infrastructure landscape into the application repo and the environment as a whole. So when we deploy our applications, that comes with its infrastructure needs asserted or declared as well. So just quickly walk you through the environment. We're a Kubernetes shop running across 3 AZs. And we made this call 2.5 years ago. It wasn't entirely clear that Kubernetes was probably going to have the upper hand, but it's worked out that way. So good fortune or good luck, I'll take it. Running a series of kube nodes, and then we've got namespaces for each of our microservices. We deploy our pods and containers into. We use Nginx as an inbound ingress controller, so that in effect routes the traffic for layer 7. ELBs in front with CDN. And browser, pretty classic setup there. And then we've got the companion services, persistence and disk and ECR and a few other bits and pieces off to the side. Relatively straightforward, but the amazing transformational thing that this had for our teams is that all of a sudden teams could both manage the application as well as the infrastructure concerning that. So we have a platform engineering team who looks after the Kubernetes itself. But otherwise, you declare how much resource, how much CPU, how much disk you need, whether you need an RDS instance, and you deploy. And basically, the pipeline won't let you deploy unless you're annotated for what team gets woken up at 2 in the morning, and what are the resource boundaries for that pod. So the good thing about that is people start to take full end-to-end accountability for their environment, and we get some of the benefits that we're after. 3 AZs. So how are we doing for time? So where did we get to? I'll flick through some of this. Basically, what I just described around the application environment, automated pipelines, clean observability practices. So we've built tracing and health checks. So we have a baseline repo which has our tracing and health checks and our logging. And that's our skeleton environment. So basically, anytime we're building an app, we build from the skeleton, and that gives us some insight, because there's nothing wrong with monolith applications. They're actually quite useful to get from A to B really quickly. And people say, oh, microservices solve a lot of those issues. Well, really, you're taking one big problem in a monolith and you're turning it into 1,000 little problems. So it's really important you get some of those practices and hygienes in place, so that you can better track and manage the relationships between those services and how they interrelate, as well as ensure that you can linearly scale around items like support and logging. What's also important is there's a bit of a voice from the engineering teams. So rather than, as we previously had, quite top-down decision-making, with constraints, how do we give teams the context that they need to make sensible engineering choices and the freedom to make those choices, and ensure that that's relatively consistent across the whole. So we've had teams, gRPC was introduced on that basis, because that just allowed for a lot less boilerplating on the coding front. Choices around languages like Golang, Concourse, and use of Slack Ops has really bubbled up from the teams rather than being asserted top down. And I think that there is the art on the culture front, is how do you get your teams with enough freedom and empowerment that are well motivated, engineer with discretionary effort can basically get some traction on some well-meaning changes to the environment. And these are some of the open source environments or packages that we're using. Basically, we only bought, I think, in the total exercise of building an end-to-end large-scale publishing media platform, we bought 2 things. I think we bought Cloudinary for image resizing because we figured that was just going to be easier than cutting that ourselves. And we bought, just because it's criticality, support for Elasticsearch. Otherwise, the whole thing was open source. So, bunch of logos. So this is how we now release. We basically ask our Ink bot. So the platform as a whole is called Ink, a bit of a homage to a rapidly dying medium. It's going to live on in digital form. So release API account version 131 to the staging environment, please. And then basically Ink releaser comes out, gives you a bit of a thumbs up. We get dual sign off. So you can see there's buttons that appear normally so we can get product ownership approval as well as tech approval, which is really just saying who do I need to go and talk to when something breaks or I've got a question about a particular release. And then we just get a confirmation note, and all of that is triggered just with the Kubernetes environment. And we do a staggered failover as we kill off pods and regenerate. Pretty standard visual pipeline out of Concourse. So that covers off a lot of the tech stuff very quickly. And look, that's interesting and engineers love it. And there's some really great stuff that we've been able to do. I actually think where we've probably made most gains is in shifting the culture a lot. We went from quite a mushroomed team culture where teams weren't really listened to one where there's a much more participatory and engaged and flatter structure around how we run those teams. And so we started, because we couldn't bring everyone, all 150 people over for this journey, we really had a team of 12 for the first 3-4 months. Because we wanted to get in place that trajectory. We wanted to build the right team, incubate it in the right way, and then think about scaling it once the architecture's in place, the culture's in place, and the practices and ways of working have been redefined. So small autonomous team with clear goals, driving that accountability, flatter structures. So I got to get my hands dirty. When you've got a small team, you get to play with the toys, which I always love. Now that I'm back to running a larger team, I don't get as much time, but I still try and get in there. And we used a lot of data transparency, so a lot of dashboarding, and which I'll show you some examples of. And the showcasing was useful, not just for the traditional agile pieces around accountability and commitment, but actually just to celebrate our wins and get, because there was a microcosm of the business in this offsite location. So there was a lot more inter-business, inter-vertical engagement that you wouldn't normally get. And just allows us to focus on that shared understanding and context. So why document stuff? Let's get everyone in the room. Let's get a whiteboard. Let's map out what we need to do. Let's facilitate that conversation. Let's make a call. Let's walk out of the room and let's get going. So with that emphasis, you can get a lot done in a relatively short period of time, and people certainly realize then, right, I've got a stake at the table. I can get engaged in this conversation, or I can sway or put my opinion out there. And that you start to see just a higher level of commitment and engagement around, right, this may actually be doing something and going somewhere. So that had a profound impact, and that's something we've tried not to lose as we've scaled out the teams. Co-opted a lot of open source ways of working. So rather than teams owning repos, basically any team can contribute to any repo by issuing that pull request. And we have a very healthy PR culture where there's a high quality bar on the PRs and the test automation that goes around that. But what we didn't want to do is have multiple teams reaching into each other's backlogs and creating dependencies and wait queues. So basically, if I need to change that repo, I will go and change that repo and make that change, because I care about that work and it's my work that I need to get done. So doing that needs a high trust setup with the appropriate process and sort of pull request culture around that. And that's co-opted from the open source environment. And it drives teams to the point where they're accountable for those outcomes. Who runs, release plan burnups? Show of hands. So this is a variation on that, something I call the glide path. So very simply, we want to hit a date for a given scope. The red bar is the scope. The yellow is the team's actual velocity against that, and the blue is the idealized glide path to hit that date for that given scope at that point in time. Now, this has been immensely powerful. Who does project reporting and RAG statuses and all of that shit? Right, cool, got rid of it. So, because basically I can show this, I can put this up on a big screen TV, I can show everyone from the CEO to the most junior engineer who works in on day one, and everyone sort of gets it. So, and what this accounts for is those classic arguments where you guys aren't working hard enough, or we're not getting stuff done, or the scope's changed, you guys have just added a bunch of random stuff. Well, red line is scope. So here's what we thought the problem was, and then look where we ended up in terms of volume of work. Now, some of that is re-estimation of backlog, but a lot of that is, hey, our understanding of the problem has changed over time, and who hasn't done a custom software project where your understanding of the problem has expanded as you've got deeper into the problem, right? So this sort of accounts for that, and then everyone can rationalize, right, well, product owners can go, right, well, maybe I need to try and find ways to bring the scope back in. Or teams can go, right, how do we get more stuff done at a faster rate? Like that flat line there is Christmas and New Year's, right? So instantly you see the impact of what's going on. But that's basically gotten rid of 2-3 page status reports, because basically what you need to talk about is up there, or it's related to that in some way. So we've gone basically from very enterprisey, not a strong engineering voice, top-down centralized, to heavy adopters of open source, very much focused on the empowered teams where we've got product designers and product owners and engineers and DevOps specialists and QA engineering sitting within the one team. One of the architectural principles we have is that a team should self-contain the resources it needs to get 95, 98% of its work done itself. So if you can reduce those interlocking dependencies between teams, it means you're going to increase velocity because you're reducing dependencies and wait time. And basically keep your management set up as shallow as possible. So basically ultimately this is good, makes for happy teams. The economic reality of doing this is we get more stuff done at a cheaper price. I think we ended up spending 25% of the allocated budget. And you just end up with a happier, healthier environment overall as a result of that. But so there was collateral damage. So when you handpick 6 people out of a team of 150, and you go, hey, you guys are coming over here in Surrey Hills, we're going to create this amazing environment, it's going to be awesome, we're going to use the latest tech, and everyone else can just stay and look after the shit, and we'll let you know when we're done. That's it's to some extent it's necessary, because you can't boil the ocean with 150 people. You can't make that change. But there needs to be some acknowledgement, some empathy for the alienation and exclusion that results. Because people feel, well, why aren't I worthy? Why can't I participate in that? So there's a sense of A team versus B team. And also the skill set that team learned over that 12 months was radically different to the skill set and the tooling that the existing team had. So, it's one thing to get to market, but you might win the battle, but how are you going to win the war to bring the 140 other people back into the equation where they feel included and involved, and that they've got the necessary skills and they feel they've got the support around acquiring those skills. So, this is not without consequence. And that was we've spent a lot of effort trying to bridge those gaps. So we saw lots of high rates of churn, rumor mills building because of some of the secrecy surrounding that work, because it impacted other parts of the business. There was a cone of silence, and that resultant skill gap, just took a lot of sustained effort to bridge. So there is very real collateral damage to this strategy. But if you have a large company that you need to turn around on a short notice, I don't know that there's too many other options. You can try and mitigate some of this, but steering an oil tanker versus a speedboat, you've got to opt for the necessity to move quickly and the requirements that predicate around that. So ultimately, this is what it ends up doing. It's easy to prepare a story. We can get shit done. We're writing great content. Hopefully we're holding crooks to account and governments and various people in the market, describing Sydney's social fabric and being a paper of record. And that's all done on the Inc platform. Interestingly, Washington Post, under Jeff Bezos, sells its publishing platform known as ARC. Very shortly, that will surpass Washington Post's earnings as a media business. It'll be a $100 million platform business. We are well placed, and there's been discussion, although we haven't pursued it yet, around potentially competing in that space, because we feel we've got a platform that's of equivalence to what they've got in market. But interesting that there's just that orthogonal disruption coming out of the media space as they're starting to sell this as a platform. And this is really why we're doing it, because the media landscape is changing and content is getting served in channels that weren't not conceived 10, 15, 20 years ago. So how do you build a platform that anticipates that and allows you to service those channels at a much lower economic cost? So basically, we got a bunch of stuff done. We had fun doing it. Thoroughly recommend it if you ever get the mandate to go and do something like this. But start small, move quickly, and then think about how you ramp up and scale up and bring everyone else back into that equation. As always, the technology is relatively straightforward. It's the people equation that needs a lot of consideration and focus around how you build an engaging and open culture to get that type of work done. So thank you.